Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and I have with me today Dr. Joe Malone. He's a Ph.D., CPT, LMMC, LWMC, and CFE. He's got all the letters. Dr. Malone is a psychologist, and he taught for many years at Tennessee State University. He's lectured at Vanderbilt and Princeton and University of Miami, Alabama, Catholic University of America. Been all over the place speaking and teaching. In 2012, he worked with creating the new course called Women's Personal Conditioning, along with the sorority wellness program, which was extraordinarily successful and effective. He was also named the Greek Faculty Member of the Year 2010 and 2016. So he's worked with college students and sororities and fraternities to really help them be healthier. He's also a neuropsych and holds a Ph.D. in health and human performances with a minor in neuropsychology and specialization in women's health and sexual wellness. He's been in lots of magazines, published in a lot of things. And then Dr. Malone served on the CDC initiative for STI prevention, which is sexually transmitted infections and diseases, and for the state of Tennessee. He's been happily married to his wife, Jody, for over 40 years. And he's also co-author of Battle of the Sexes, which we'll get into today, and co-founder with Jody of the Sexual Integrity and Intelligence Initiative, Sex IQ. So, man, welcome. Thank you. That's a mouthful, but I'm super excited to have you on. It's not often that I have somebody on who is just so well adept in this conversation of sexuality and sexual health. It's so few people are talking about it. So I've been really excited to connect with you. So how's it going? Welcome.
Thank you so much, Clint. I've been excited to talk with you as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and appreciate your background and all of the expertise you bring to all of this. So looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I'm just learning, man. So we got connected for y'all listening. Recently, we both got to do some filming with America Unchained Project. It is a nonprofit working with human trafficking and just children being exploited and sexual trauma and pornography and all the unhealthy things going on in the world. And so there were several people that got to be a part of this project. And I'm not sure. Do you know when it comes out?
I think she said fall.
Okay.
I think the editing process, she's got a little bit more interviewing to do, I think, in August. I think sometime in the fall.
Yeah, and so they interviewed you on the effects of hypersexuality on kids, which I can't wait to hear because I talked a little bit about something different. So kind of tell us how you got connected with that Unchained project and what was your focus on that in that conversation for those that might not watch it or see it.
Sure. Well, somebody referred me to charity, and I'm not exactly sure who it is. I've ended up speaking with so many different people these days. You know how that is.
Yep.
But I appreciate whoever it was, and really had a resonant situation with Charity once we got to know her, and we actually had her. My wife and I had her over to dinner here in Nashville, and before we did the taping, and yeah, it was really positive situation there. You know, I've been aware of trafficking, sex trafficking and child trafficking in the past, but it really wasn't up on my radar screen as much as it is now. And particularly with the recent Sound of Freedom movie, movie that's come out. But I've always known it was a huge problem and just one of the worst problems. And so I was happy to and grateful to be able to lend any kind of expertise I could to the situation and the question. And so I felt like we had a really good taping, and hopefully she came away with some good material that she can use, going forward on putting the project together. And then she related that yourself, that you were interviewed for it, and I gained a lot of insight to folks like yourself's expertise and the angle that you're coming at things from. So it was a big educational project for me, I gotta say. I learned a lot out of it. So, and then you and I coming together on this, I just felt really grateful and humbly thankful to be able to jump on your podcast with you and learn some more.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited about it. And hopefully we can have continued conversation. I think when I find men who are, kind of cut from the same cloth and working in the same vein, it's nice to hopefully we can keep up an email and talk, because Man, I just feel so isolated sometimes. And, in this work, I'm sure you felt the same way as a male in therapy and dealing with emotional intelligence, just being kind of in the minority of a lot of things and feeling, a little ostracized or put out. Have you felt that way over your career?
Oh yeah, yeah. And actually, I was just talking to a young woman regarding her ministry towards young women that are hooked on pornography, and she made the point. Well, it's really unusual to have a male, with the kind of background that you have, that I have, And yeah, I felt all along the way that oftentimes, the counseling profession and all of it we're talking about here is pretty much female dominated. So um, she made the point, and I agreed with her. It's important to have both males and females, engaged in this situation and bringing both perspectives to it. But uh, I never expected to be, in this situation. Really, it's been I think, providential pathway that I've ended up where I'm at here. But it's always good, to completely answer your question. It's always good to run into another man who is, like you said, cut out of the same cloth and has the same worldview and mindset and realizes the importance of what we're dealing here.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's good, and we need more fathers stepping up, and men in the church, and men within, professionalism to step up and kind of take the lead. I think it's hard in our culture now, especially, with a lot of cancel culture and a lot of the history of male abuse and dominance and all this kind of things, which are valid justifications, but I would want women to speak into men, men to speak into women, and vice versa, so that we can all be as healthy as possible. And so when you read, your credentials are mine, and it's like healthy, helps women with healthy sexuality. And it's like, well, what does he know? He's a dude, And it's like, well, maybe we all need a little bit of perspective from the other side from time to time so that we're not blinded by our own biases.
Right. And, when you think about it, Clint, we think back to the beginning of human history. From that point forward, males and females have had to work together, and we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here as a species if they hadn't done that. So the ability to do that and to solve problems together and laugh together, that's something I've heard. I heard somebody that was wise about marriage a long time ago spoke into Jody's and my marriage. They said that in order to have a successful marriage, you got to be able to do for sure two things, and one is solve problems together, and the other is laugh together. And I really found that to be true over the years, that those two things keep coming up, all the time. And they're extremely important along with a lot of other things.
Yeah, man. That's good. Yeah, well, me and my wife have those two for sure. We can solve problems, and we do a lot of laughing, and our boys are obnoxious, and we're all four very extroverted. We're a lot to handle when we're all together, and we're around our introverted friends. One of our best friends, Ashley, which I'll give her a shout out. She's introverted, and her kids are extroverted too, and so it's just a lot going on in our house when all eight of us are together. But we enjoy it, man, and we got to laugh, and you got to laugh at the kids and just shake your head and lower your expectations and enjoy it, because it's too fast and too quick, man. It goes by so quickly. Tell me a little bit about you and just where you're from, how you got into what you do, and just as much of your story as you want to kind of share leading up to what you do now.
Sure. Well, I worked for a long time here in the Nashville area in the fitness industry and health and fitness industry, and was concerned, with people just physical health. Again, their illness or not. Again, we were dealing from the mid 90s to about the 2005. We were dealing with a lot of folks with heart disease and cancer and you name it, from the life of affluence that here in this affluent suburb of Nashville that they were dealing with. And I was literally it was like one-on-one. We were working with people one-on-one, and I found that extremely frustrating because there were so many of them and so few of us, and you probably felt that in your work as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think scripture says something about that.
Yeah, then the fields being white. But it was one of those things where I ended up with one of my clients actually died on the beach down in Florida, and that was tough, of a heart attack. And then another, not a client but a member, I was on management duty, and I ended up giving him chest compressions and from a heart attack, and he didn't make it, and it was just a horrible 25 minutes or so of him, trying to live, and me trying to, a couple of us trying to help him live, and not succeeding. So I was considering getting out of the whole thing, because it was depressing and disillusioning. But I had a chance again. I think this is all providential because it just didn't come about. I don't think by chance. I had the opportunity to teach at one of the area universities, Middle Tennessee State University, here in the Nashville area, on a master's at the time, and during that time frame, I learned of this research that you may be aware of called maternal imprinting or fetal imprinting or
Yeah.
developmental origins of health and disease, and realized that the upshot of that research was that if you work with girls and young women from the time really kind of around puberty until they get to the point where they're being carrying babies, that if you could help them be healthy, you're helping not only them but probably their future two children or maybe more, and of course their husband, hopefully. So you're getting a multiple effect there. You're getting a multiplier effect. And I when I was talking with the folks there at the university, they said, "Well, that's a really unique idea, and a really I think important idea." They said, "Why don't you do a PhD around it?" And so I I said, "I think that's a great idea." So I did create, and I ended up creating a college women's wellness program there. It started out just being a college women's women's personal conditioning class, but I ended up having a lot of the sorority women, as you can imagine, on the campus in the class, and they asked me to come and work with their sororities, and that's kind of how it blossomed into a wellness program. And again, to make a long story short here, because there's a 5 years of actually teaching that. I taught that from 2005 to 2017, so 12 years. And during the teaching of the class and then getting the PhD, I interviewed 32 of them in depth, and then also did 10 focus groups with 10 different classes, all women's classes. And as you'd expect, their eating situation, the nutrition situation on campus was really tough. The getting time to do your exercise routine was tough, and all the other things, the holistic problems that they had, just generally living with
Yeah.
their jobs and everything. But the biggest thing that I came across that I wasn't expecting, I was totally unaware of, Clint, was this thing they called hookup culture.
Mm-hmm.
And with hookup culture, I've realized that, boy, this is really damaging them, and a lot more than anything that I else had been paying attention to. So I went to my committee, my PhD committee, and said, "Listen, I've kind of come across this phenomenon that I think is more important. Would you be okay if I shifted towards more of a sexual wellness approach rather than just your typical holistic wellness, college women's wellness program?" They said, "Yeah, there's nobody else doing that we know of." So again, I think that was a providential situation, and I didn't realize it at the time. But the 12 years I was there, particularly the 5 that I was teaching the all women's classes, I was ruffling feathers in the political realm. There was folks there that didn't want to have a class just for females. They wanted it to be both, And again, ironically, these were women and genders folks that studies folks that were worried about the women being in class by themselves and not being good enough or whatever to be in the men's class. Again, they had the option to be in the co-ed class anytime they wanted to, but 2/3 of them were choosing to be in the women's class. They seemed to kind of like Curves Incorporated. A lot of them ended up wanting to work out on their own. So ended up getting canceled actually in 2017. They literally canceled my classes. I didn't realize at the time what cancellation was, but that's what happened. And in the meantime, I'd been writing this book that you mentioned earlier, co-authoring it with one of my former 2007. She was in my class, students there. That was now a nutritionist, and so again, the book had started off in the direction of just your standard college women's wellness type of a book, and also men's. I mean, we included men in it as well, but mostly it was focused on women's situation because that's what I've been dealing with. And about 3/4 of it ended up being on sexual wellness for young women of that age, because again, as I kind of went down that rabbit hole, and learned what was going on with them as far as the casual sex and the heartache, heartbreak, anxiety, depression, all things you're familiar with, I know. I found out this is just this huge change that's happened since I was an undergraduate, which was way back when, and it's been for the worst, you know.
Yeah.
So wrote the book. Ended up being mostly about sexual wellness. I was canceled, wondering, okay, okay, God, what do we do now? You know, I'm no longer teaching, and I got this book,
What was
and it was
the reason for cancellation?
I didn't want to go along with the. I didn't go along with the gender ideology that they're trying to get me to teach. Again, that was early. You know, there not many people knew what we meant by gender ideology and teaching sex as a social construction as opposed to teaching it as a biological, you know, outcome
Mm-hmm.
basically of how you're born and all the things that I was learning, you know, in my research of physically how we're different, male and female, and how it's all designed to come together, and all of that. So they didn't want me. Literally, they told me along the way. My supervisor, he at one point he goes because he knew that I drove an hour to get there. He said, "What do you listen to on the way over?" And I said, "Well, just whatever." He goes, "Ever listen to NPR?" And I said, "Yeah, sometimes," and which was true. And he goes, "You should do more of that." And then he goes, "It seems like you have a code that you live by." And I said, "I try to." He goes, "Are you a Christian?" And he goes, and I said, "Yeah, I'm a Christian." He goes, you'll probably want to rethink that too." So this is like 2014, 2015. So um, from that far back, you know, when being on the university campus, you could see a lot of what we're seeing in society today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, trying to kind of taking over basically, I guess is what you'd say. So the reason would be is that I didn't go along with the culture, and it was obvious that they were trying to have me go along with the culture. And all you have to do, I guess, is just say, "Yeah, you know, I think I can see it that way. I see what you mean," and except I know that's not the truth, you know. So that's how the cancellation ended up happening.
Interesting.
But yeah, but it ended up that ended up with a book, and it was the way that the book was designed to be used on secular campuses to be able to raise their sex IQ because I could tell I learned enough, and of course learning what I'd had in my research, my PhD research, but also knowing what their situation was there and kind of the norms that were involved. I knew that there was a whole lot of sexual conflict that was going on because of the situation, and then that there was very little sexual empathy because neither the males nor the females could really envision what the other one how they were seeing things compared to how they themselves were seeing it. So I could see there was a huge area for education to be able to help that. So what happened though was, again, I think it's providential. There's a group from um, Princeton that read the book. They're called the Love and Fidelity Network, and in 2018, so the book came out in fall of 2018.
And this is
They asked me,
Battle of the Sexes.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and they said, "Could you come up and speak at our conference?" And I had never heard of the Love and Fidelity Network, so of course I looked them up and I said, "I would love to come up and speak at your conference." And the story on them is that one of their young women back in 2007 that founded the organization got tired of hookup culture being the only option on Princeton's campus, so she founded this Love and Fidelity Network. And there were so many people when they heard about it on the other Ivy League campuses wanted the same thing that it ended up easily being established in right after 2007 on to all the campuses on the Ivy League have chapters now. Notre Dame, Stanford, and other Hillsdale, other elite colleges and universities all have chapters. So I went up there, my wife and I, because she always goes. Jody goes everywhere with me these days, which I think is great. I mean, that's our message is how important that marriage is. But we went up there and I spoke, and it was extremely successful, and it was a great learning experience for me. But the upshot of that is from there, then I went from there to Catholic University and University of Miami, Alabama. It's just, you know, you name different places, and I've been to a lot of them these days because there are these groups on campuses that are interested in the real science for one thing, which is what I try to share. But the other thing is they're interested in more of a traditional approach, to relationships, and they see the wisdom in it. And particularly on those elite campuses, you have a lot of brain power represented there. And there's particularly the male side of it. One of the correlations that we found with I guess the ability to discern the value of an exclusive relationship, or I guess you'd say monogamy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the top 20% in intelligence on the male side are the ones who are able to discern that. Now that leaves 80% that aren't. But and on the other side, it's more like 20-80 the other ways, where
Yeah.
the 80% of the women discern it. So all that said, things have just kind of gone from one to another to another to another, but it's all pretty much been a lot of Christian groups. It's been all pretty much been groups that are interested in not what the society is saying these days, and not all the things I mentioned earlier that are they go against the way that's traditionally courtship has been, and traditional marriage, engagement, all family, and all that type of thing. So and not only that, at one point, well, let me tell you one of the Princeton story. When we were up there, I think it was the third day, of the conference. I'd already spoken, and this pair of young women came up to Jody and I, because we were going through the vendors booths and all. Jody again being my wife, and she this couple of young women, suddenly out of nowhere, they walk up to us and they said, "We've been watching you guys." I turned to Jody and I said, "Uh-oh, what we do?"
Yeah.
And but then she continued on again. This extremely intelligent young woman. She goes, "We've been watching you, and we went to your talk the other night." She goes, "It was great." She said, "But we've been watching you guys, and we can see that we've been able to see over the days that we've been watching you that you're still really in love." And kind of gets me emotional to think about it. She goes, "And that's much more important than anything you said
Ooh.
in your talk." And so a very first kind of speaking situation like that, and to have that happen, I've never forgotten that.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah. So how how you are is a bigger message than what you say
Oh,
necessarily.
absolutely, man. People watch your feet, and especially in the world right now where most of those kids and teens and young adults have no model for it. So you can give them
Mm-hmm.
information all day long, but transformation comes with seeing it and experiencing it, and so if 60 something percent of those kids are from a divorced family, and then the other percentage are from pretty unhealthy families, and 8% of them or less come from a family that's pretty healthy and organic, and so you're looking at 92% of the college students that haven't even seen a healthy marriage. So for you
Right.
to give the information, and then also for them to see just how you interact for a couple of days, like that's huge. And ultimately, right, that's what discipleship is.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the church being the church, and leading a certain way and walking a certain way, so that people see Jesus. They don't just hear about him and hear about the theoretical ideal, of him, but they see him. And so I think that's such a beautiful testimony to what you're talking about. Tell me a little bit
Great.
about what do you think, like, what are the major, if you could give like maybe 3 or 4 of the major discrepancies between what's going on in our society as far as the science, like what are you seeing that's such a simple, maybe it's very clear, and where are we getting confused in these situations, like just from the science perspective, not even from like a biblical worldview perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. But here's what I would say. And I don't use heterosexuality as my focus, my background. But of course, when you deal with heterosexuality, you're going to end up dealing somewhat with things that aren't heterosexual.
Yep.
And so this whole situation with transgender, for instance, and just the overall LGBTQ, all of it, the ones that they've added on. But with the whole thing, I think what needs to be kept in mind by everybody, and this is just scientifically, is that we're talking about 3 to 4% of the population, and so it appears by looking at our society that 50% of the population, is dealing with this. And not that anybody, numbers don't necessarily make the importance, but the magnitude of the attention paid to it when there's all these other things that are going on with the heterosexuals, the 96 to 97% that are heterosexual that are being ignored. And that's, I think, one big thing is to remember the size of the challenge with folks that are dealing with things that aren't heterosexual. The other thing is, specifically with the trans situation, most people don't, and you probably know this, but a lot of other people won't know this, how that process happens and how rare it is. Now, again, we're looking at 3 to 4% of everything, LGBTQ, everything that isn't heterosexual. And out of that small slice of the pie, you're looking at a tiny, tiny percentage that are actually literally physically transgender. And again, I always try to, when I'm asked to elaborate on this, I try to get across the process that we've established scientifically so far of how it happens in these rare cases. And what it is when that we were talking about the in utero process earlier, and so many important things happen during that time period. But one of them is that people's sexuality is set, basically. And the way it works is in the early part, the first trimester of a pregnancy, then again with a baby that's XY, a male baby, the testes will be established and they'll start secreting testosterone. And so the male genitalia will be formed the first third of the pregnancy. And then later in the pregnancy, presumably, almost always, that same testosterone environment will cause the brain to organize in a male typical way. So you have two stages. You have the genitalia being set through hormonal exposure, and then you have the brain being set. Well, once in a very great while, something happens, and again, scientifically, we don't know yet what it might be, but the hormonal milieu that is there in the first part of the pregnancy, that maybe let's just say causes it to be a male baby, isn't there at the middle to end part of the pregnancy. And so the default setting, as you probably know, we all start out female unless there's a XY chromosome and this testosterone process happens. So that's where you would get somebody who has male genitalia but feels like they're a female. And that is the more often occurring situation. But it's only this often occurring. It's 1 in 10,000. 1 in 10,000 live births. So you've got a female to male, male to female transgender, the feeling of being a female when you have a male's body. The other one is even more rare. It's only 1 in 30,000 births. So where you have the opposite, feeling from one sex to the other. So that's something that I would urge people to remember, is that in reality, we have a very small number of people in our society that literally are going around feeling like one sex, but they have the genitalia and such of the other sex, the hormonal profile.
And you're saying that is from a biological birth genetic, would you call it malformation?
I would just call it an anomaly.
Okay.
Because again, you also get a very small percentage that are intersex,
right.
Where it's hard to tell for the.
An intersex is born with different both genitals, but different parts and sizes and.
Right. And they're hard to distinguish, but again, a tiny, tiny number, it's a tiny, tiny percentage. And what's important to remember is that if you have 10 young people in a high school thinking they're that, when you average it out, you got about 1 in 20,000 chance of being either one. What's the chances of having 10 kids in one high school of 1,500 or 2,000 people of that actually happening? There's almost literally no chance of that happening. So what's going on is obviously a social contagion situation where, because of a lot of factors, that are going on in our society right now, a lot of young people are thinking they're that way, but actually they're not. They're literally not that way physically, and eventually that's going to be borne out. What they are actually from their physical inheritance in almost all cases. all but, you're looking at that again, about 1 in 20,000 cases. They're going to find out down the road as they mature more that they actually are what they were, what it showed they were when they were, what was observed when they were born,
Mm-hmm.
basically. So to have things like breasts removed and penis and testicles removed as a 12-year-old or 13, 14, whatever, I think you can see the implications as far as the wisdom of that or the lack thereof. So that's what I would say is that from what we can tell scientifically, it does happen in reality, but it's extremely, I can't emphasize that enough, extremely rare for it to happen in reality,
So what
physical
science?
reality.
So what
Good.
science are they pointing to? The people who would disagree with you, what science are they pointing to that what you say is not true?
What I think they would say, and again, most of the time, my time is spent with heterosexuality, but I think they would
Yeah,
say
we'll get
that,
off this topic in a second, but I want to.
yeah, no, it's kind of a hot topic right now, so I don't mind telling what I've learned. And again, it's amazing how few people know how rare that process. They don't know the process and they don't know the numbers. Um, but they would say that because we had such a discriminatory society, such an oppressive society towards folks that were of anything that isn't heterosexual, that there's been a downward pressure on people being willing to say or share that this is how they are, and so there many more of them are quote unquote coming out of the closet. But I would say that it's kind of the opposite is true because there's a lot of pressure and a lot of actually reward these days to be say that you're one of these things. And especially for a young person, a lot of them they've always needed and wanted to try to fit in. And so having a group like this that they can fit into, I think it all makes sense. Throughout history there's been different groups of young people with the way they dressed, the rings they put on their body, the different things they did, rebellious type things. So I think it all makes sense from a social perspective.
Would you
But
say eating disorders and self harm are in that same category? That we saw those kind of rise in those things as they were kind of grouped up, and I've heard that theory.
yeah, I think that the eating disorders, all of that, the potential for it has been there for a long time. I would say that, yeah, the pressure and the cutting and all that self-destructive stuff. I think that's an element of it. And then I also think that this is kind of my specialty before I got into the sexual wellness area. The whole kind of environmental situation we've got with the super palatable food, the way that's been developed, the way we've moved away from I call it natural lifestyle matching, where people used to have to labor, outside in the sunshine, or in the weather, whatever the weather was, and the laboring brought food to them, and then they needed to go labor some more in order to get more food. That's humanity's natural environment, and since we've moved away from that, I think there's a lot of things brain wise, neuropsychology wise, that when we're not in the natural environment, we're much more addiction prone.
Yeah, it's a great point. We talk about we have kids with food allergies, and I have had that conversation I think on here before, but just kind of looking at what we put in our body over the last 40 or 50 years, and how for thousands of years you couldn't eat a cow that was from Mexico, and that cow hadn't eaten the food and the environment in Mexico, and now you're eating the cow who is eating the food in Mexico, but that environment that he's in doesn't exist where you live, and how that affects our bodies and our hormones and our ecosystem and all that stuff. And I mean, obviously that's epigenetics and just all of the things that go into that, but I just feel like so little people even think about that, or think about what they're injecting in their body or what they're taking, or whatever it is. They go to the doctor and get a shot because they feel bad, but they don't have a bacterial infection, and so it seems like it's a neutral thing. Oh, I got a probiotic, or I got a whatever shot. If I didn't have anything, no harm, no foul. Instead of looking at it as like, well, I took something and I put it in my body that I didn't necessarily need. There is a consequence, and if you do that for 40 years, there are consequences. Does that make sense?
I agree completely. Makes total sense.
And then we're
And
like, where are all these food allergies coming from? Why do all these kids have all these food allergies? We didn't have these when I was a kid. And it's like, well, yeah, Grandpa, like they didn't also do these things for 50 years before you became a kid.
right. I mean, all of it, even just literal allergies, just your regular allergies, with kids not being out in the dirt and all the different things that from our natural environment. When you think about it, Clint, the generations before us, my parents grew up as farmers in southern Oklahoma, and their parents and all the way back, back in time, they pretty much lived the same way, farming wise, and then before that, maybe hunting and gathering wise, for many, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of generations. So, taking ourselves out of that natural environment and the radical change that's happened in my lifetime. And then, of course, it's been even more effect on our kids. By the way, that's our kids on the wall back there behind me.
Yeah, see them. They're
That's our
adorable.
main credential.
Yeah, that's right.
But they're big enough now to have kids of that size their own. But the change to their generation and then their generation to their kids, our grandkids, yeah, it's all been really in the direction that you're talking about as far as so many artificial things and not just things, but lifestyle, really, and that really affects us on so many levels, mental and physical, and just the functioning level. And then you point out really well that the response has been that we're so smart these days. We know how to create these drugs, that mask the symptoms for a while till they stop working, and that's both on a physical and mental level. The psychotropic drugs, they only last for a while. So yeah, you point out really a huge challenge in our society of not realizing the importance of the past and paying attention to the past and how our ancestors, that's a lot of what the book's about, the battles of the sexes, how our ancestors lived and how they related to each other, and also how, the way they ate and the way they had to exert in order to be able to eat. That's if you can imitate that, if you can imitate the way they lived, then you're going to end up being pretty healthy, because the in general, unless there's a built-in problem, the human body wants to be healthy given the right inputs, that type of thing. So, but I realized a while back that and again, obviously with your work and your background, you've realized this too, that those natural lifestyle matching, behavioral habits that we have or we don't have, they are also applicable in the way we live with our relationships. The relationships we've had over the millennia have been, again, scientifically speaking, at least for a long time, let's just put it that way, have been at the core of them have been a monogamous relationship between a man and a woman, and then creating the family, and then both working towards taking care of the kids and helping them to repeat the process and that type of thing. Because as you know, humans, our offspring, take the longest by far in all of nature to mature. And back when they were hunting and gathering, having a woman, once she's pregnant, let's say 18, 19 years old, because they didn't get their menstrual cycles until later in their lives compared to ours now.
Yeah, can you tell me about that real quick?
Yeah. Again, because of the life we're talking about, they had a very, well, that's our natural lifestyle. So eating the way they did, the exercise, the exertion, they had to, if you were talking about hunting and gathering, it's like up to 12 miles a day of walking in order to find the food.
So when did we see the shift from females, going from 18 down to, what is it now, 10 and 11 in some ages?
That's been not that long. It's been about maybe 50, 60, 70 years, at the most, maybe 50 years, because it's really been from the 60s forward, because from the 60s forward is when you really start seeing the change in the lifestyle from a physical life, a laboring life, and all of that, to what we have now, where it's just so much our thumbs or our fingers only, and voice, voice being the predominant earning power and brain, I guess you'd say.
So you're saying in the 60s, women were starting their periods at 17 and 18?
No, no, no. I'm saying that's when it started as far as the
The
downward,
decline. Got it.
the decline. Yeah.
What I'm
And
asking
then,
is when does the kind of research show that it started going from 18 down?
yeah, and it wouldn't have probably been 17, 18, even, in the 60s, but it still would be up there. It would have been up there 14, 15, 16, the 80s, basically. In the 80s is when just about all the bad things that we're experiencing today really got going. And, a big part of that was, well, a couple things. One was the food supply, changing out the fat in the food supply, making fat the enemy, the F word, I guess you'd say, and replacing it with carbohydrates, particularly sweet carbohydrates. And the whole keto movement these days is kind of all based on the fact that we got so far out of whack starting in the 80s by removing the fat out of the diet and demonizing it, that ended up, the obesity ended up just really, really skyrocketing
Mm-hmm.
there. But also, you know, the 60s and 70s was a progression of things like, 1960, the birth control pill was invented. And then 63, I'll just say it this way, throughout the 60s and into the 70s, we had, prayer taken out of school, Bible reading taken out of school. I would call it sexualizing sex ed put into school. So not sex ed necessarily to keep you from, it was sex ed to sexualize the students in a lot of cases. And then 1970, I think it was no fault divorce, abortion, 73. Um, all of these things pushed the natural lifestyle matching of what I was saying before. You grow up, you get a girlfriend, boyfriend, you go steady, you get engaged, you get married, you start having kids fairly young. I mean, again, the age of getting married was much younger in almost all cases, and then having children was much younger, which turns out to be a lot healthier as far as the health of the woman, particularly her risk of cancer, reproductive cancer going forward. So, the 1980s forward, I would say, would be the food supply changing the way that I described it. At the same time, the laboring jobs were also disappearing. Again, my dad he was a farmer to grow up to begin with as a kid, and then he was a heavy steel, heavy equipment manufacturing welding type of guy
Mm.
that was lifting steel all the time in the big factory. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she was working all the time with, hanging clothes on the line and all the stuff that she did physically. They were used to that. That's the lifestyle they grew up with, and they had no allergies that I can think of because they'd grown up in the dirt, of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So I say all that to say that most people these days, or many people these days, they're able to see that the physical part of it, the way we changed our eating and the way we changed our exertion, had a huge deleterious effect on our health.
Yeah.
But most of them don't catch on to also the way that the orthodox or traditional approach to dating and getting married and having it happen younger, when both of them, both the male and the female, but particularly the female, was in their fertile peak. Female's fertile peak of fertility is age 19 to 29. And after 29, you start running into problems. And males is 24 to 26. So becoming parents at those younger ages is really, really healthy, not only for the couple, but also for the children. So, and then, all the things that young men and young women get into when they're single and 26, 27, 28 years old, compared to what they're like, and again, in a good marriage situation, marriage, and you probably know this, but a marriage in a good situation happens to mold men, into better workers, better providers, less apt to take drugs, get in trouble, jail type trouble, get murder somebody. All of those things go down when they get married. And then, of course, age 15 to 25 is what I call the male danger zone, the testosterone trap, because that's when, well, 17 is actually the highest level of testosterone in a male's life. So, and when they don't have much of a prefrontal cortex, as you know, to hold them back, they don't have the gamma aminobutyric acid inhibitory system in their brain at all until about 22, 23, 24 years old. It's a recipe for disaster as far as males being killed by other males, killing other males, accidents. I'll give it to you this way. A male of that age group, 15 to 25, and again, you probably know this already, but your listeners might not. 15 to 25, I call it the male danger zone, has about a 4 times, it's round numbers here, but about a 4 times greater chance of being killed by suicide, homicide, car accident, or drug overdose than a female of the same age.
Mm-hmm.
Because of those really, really high testosterone levels they have. And again, very little inhibitory brain, prefrontal cortex, or that whole major inhibitory system, the gamma aminobutyric acid system, not being matured until about 23, 24, 25. So I say all that to say this, that in my research, Clint, what I've come down to, and also my own personal experience, my life experience, the guardrails, I would call them, that Christianity, and I think other major world religions, but particularly I can speak to Christianity, scientifically, scripture supported as far as optimal lifestyle, optimal life outcomes, whether you want to go down that, the biblical pathway or not. Just that's been the upshot of my research. When we did the research for the book, I fastidiously did the research in the state of mind that I'm going to do whatever I find the best scientific research to say. I'm going to teach that on college campuses. Now, I didn't get the opportunity to do that because it didn't end up being woke enough. It was out of sync with the woke environment that we have now. Mm-hmm. But what I realized from reading all of this different research, and it's been a ton of research. I've had 6 years, I guess, 5 or 6 years to do more research since the book, and since I've been canceled. It clearly shows that the biblical or major world religions approach to chastity, premarital chastity, and which leads to, by the way, it leads to marriage because it gets men to commit, and all of it, the whole picture of it, being open to having children, which is a whole other thing. How we've got the depopulation, the demographic collapse happening now around the world. So all of it really adds up to. It's like the manufacturer's specifications for a machine. It's how's this machine going to work the best, and those either biblical admonitions or morals, ethics, however you want to look at it, is how we work best. And again, I think we've seen on a lot of different levels. I think we've seen a lot of harm and a lot of very suboptimal human functioning since we've gone away from those societal norms and morals, mores that we're talking about, of being expected to get married, before you have sex, and sticking with the person you married, supporting your children, and again, them taking as long as they take, human children take to develop, which is again the next nearest one to us is the orangutan. It takes them 8 years to be able to be on their own, but most young creatures can take care of them. So they run, they can defend themselves, they can get away, from predators. Human babies, because our brains are so big and we have to be born so prematurely, you and I both know, and people that are listening to us know, if they know anything about children, that babies are helpless, basically. They're helpless for the first 8-9 months, and then they're pretty much helpless until, I don't know when they
22.
When they find how old are your kids?
5.5 and 8.5.
Well, you got
a long way to go, man, and I can tell you that's 100% true. Go ahead.
Does that make sense though?
Oh no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, we've talked about this before, and we were literally just talking about that this weekend. Mm-hmm. And that's why I actually started this podcast, was just having these discussions and looking at the big picture of what's happening and the changes. The average person doesn't have time to do that. Mm-hmm. The average person is just in this grind of living, and they think that, all of us kind of get stuck in this is how the world's always been, and we don't realize how quickly things have escalated. I've talked about this a couple times now, but I've I'm putting out a new book called Building Better Bridges, a guidebook to having difficult conversations that can save our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what you're talking about, and a lot of stuff I've read on what you're saying, is kind of the book. My book is the precursor, to that early kind of childhood development, where I'm looking at a lot of prevention and how do we look at what's happened with parenting? Just the idea of parenting, right, didn't come into the English language until 1958 or something. Like, that's insane. But you tell people that and they're like, what? Right? And it's like, yeah, we haven't been talking about parenting for very long from a industrialized situation. Same thing with education, same thing with, our medical system, same thing. I mean, all these things are relatively new things.
Right.
I mean, even as a counselor, I'm a Christian counselor, I'm a licensed professional counselor, but in the reality, like, that's only been around for 70 years and Christian counseling's only been around for about 40. So like,
right.
We're just not that far into thinking. We think we know everything, but we're not even willing to look at kind of the totality of all the information without saying, well, that means that you're telling me what to do. And I think that's the most important thing I want to follow up on our conversation with trans and all these things and men and women is everybody's discussing what the research says. Everybody who's an educator is trying to look at what the best option is, right? We're going to look at the science, we're going to look at the research, and we're going to say, here's what the best guess we can do, and we're going to present that to you, and then you get to choose what you want to do and believe.
Right.
We're not telling you what to believe. No one's trying to force it down your throat. And I think because so many Christians have done that, and there's been so much religious trauma and so much religious abuse, then having a conversation like this, it kind of feels like you're walking on eggshells because you don't want to hurt anybody. You don't want to tell anybody what to do, but you do want to discuss what we see to be the best evidence in science. And everybody else has that right too, right? That's why I keep asking, like, what's the opposition? Because I want to hear the opposition. I want to see the science. I read it all the time. I'm constantly trying to read, about addiction or about depression or about, right now the big thing is microdosing and psilocybin and mushrooms. And I'm like, I want to read about that and learn about that. Maybe we're missing something. Maybe I don't want to let my religious lens or my spiritual lens or biblical lens, whatever you want to call it, cloud something that may be a very healthy, natural thing. But I also don't want to think, oh, it's just healthy because some people have said that it is, and so I'm going to take that. And I hope that people listening can learn to do that, we're just presenting our life experience and the things that we've been exposed to in the spheres of influence. Somebody in Africa may have a totally different experience, and they need to present in their sphere of influence what they think is true. And then we're all just humans trying to figure this stuff out together.
Right. Exactly. That's the way exactly that I am. I'm always reading. I'm always interested in, other perspectives, but I really have come into this and it's kind of developed over the years with me of really not having a perspective, just kind of seeing, okay, what I think the best scientific evidence is, and particularly how it either resonates or it doesn't with my previous knowledge before any of this political stuff happened. It became important the way it is, for instance, how the brain works, how the dopamine, how the serotonin, the different neurotransmitters work, how the physiology of how humans work. And then does this science, this research, does that make sense with how I know that it works? Mm-hmm. And that's how I think you could get a really good sense of it is this realistic along the lines of how the human body, the human person actually functions, at least most all of them. And again, I think that's what makes it difficult is you have anomalies, you have aberrations in anything. I mean, in any kind of process, you're going to have a few things that don't come out exactly the way everything else and everybody else does. And I think you have to, as you said, make room for that. You have to make room for people to have their differences and feel the way that they feel. Because in some cases, physically, from what I can tell, there's going to be real physical reasons behind that. It's when you have situations where it's a socially imbued thing, and there's steps taken that are irreversible, that and down the line where especially with young people with the way their brains are developing from the back, maturing from the back to the front, back and low to the front and the high. Knowing that that's the case, trying to throw out there to them the physiological, the natural science, I guess you'd say, facts of the matter as we know them now, and kind of the history of it. You know, how much of this was being shown before it became a thing, so to speak, in society, and what were the rates of it and that type of thing. So, yeah, I agree with exactly what you said. I'm curious. I'm curious as to what people have to say and research that's done. But I go through research and I will say to myself, there's a political agenda here, and so I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna think about how much it sense it makes with what I know to be the physical case, and then I'll make a judgment, like you said, and at that point. The one thing I will say too, to your comment about worldwide and different cultures and different things being meaningful or not, you know, in a different culture, I think that's very true. The fascinating thing, though, I think, is that worldwide, the human being as a physical entity,
Species, yeah.
yeah, has the same. You can go anywhere in the world, you're going to find the same physiology, basically, in an American versus a Tunisian or, you know, Russian or Southeast Asian or whatever. You're going to find the same. You're going to look different. They're going to have different maybe statures and everything, but the physiology is going to work pretty basically the same. You can give a blood transfusion to one, and you know, back and forth, and they can mate with each other, and there's going to be viable offspring if that happens. But so a lot of what came out of my research or our research for the book was that kind of universality, you know, of the way people are attracted or they're not attracted, the way the male's brains work versus the female's brains, how they're constructed differently. You find that worldwide, and not only that, you find it cross species, because a lot of the same, you know, your serotonin, your different neurotransmitters will work the same in a dog's brain as they do in the human brain. So when you really look at the big picture, as you said, which I think I love the idea of what you're doing, you know, on this podcast, because I think the big picture answers so many questions. The Asking Why podcast, a great title too.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, the reason I said, I'm going to preface real quick because I don't think
Sure.
I've ever said this on here, but one of the reasons that we named it that, and also why I want to have these conversations, is to do it with kindness, you know. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I see in our culture that I feel like is so frustrating to me is people talking about these different issues from a very didactic, angry, frustrated, me versus you, you're wrong, you should do this, look at all the harm you're causing on either side. And as I was listening to podcasts over, you know, last 10 years, but also, or not 10 years, but 5 years. And then over the course of COVID, I just kept getting frustrated with like, yeah, but that sounds so mean. Like what you're saying is, I think, true and factual, but you're not saying it in a way that someone's going to hear it. And again, I think people who are offended by the conversation we're having, they're going to turn it off and be offended. But I think there is a pretty large population of people who, if you say it differently, if you say it in a trauma responsive way, if you say it from a kind, you know, I would say a Christ-centered way where you speak truth and grace at the same time, it's way more palpable for people to at least have the discussion.
Right. And I think that's important, you know. I mean, if you're coming from a Christian perspective, again, which we didn't on the book, and because in our minds was the picture of, you got to have just secular information that is absolutely backed up, but research-wise, you know, from a secular scientific perspective, in order to be able to speak to these students on these campuses. And again, like I said, it didn't work out that way. But you know, it becomes dispassionate at that point. You're just laying out what the science says to them. So,
which is interesting because it doesn't work out. Like, that's the interesting part about it is you try to do it from a non-Christian, non-biblical perspective, and you just give the facts, and you're still canceled.
Right, because things have changed so much, you know, since from 2017 to now, basically, you know.
Wild.
So it's going in the direction, it's going in a direction that isn't scientific, you know, and well, no need to going into that, but going back to what you said, I think it's really good insight, Clint, that from a Christian perspective, if you're coming from that, then you need to be kind in whatever you do, and whatever the discussion gets into or entails, you have to say what you're saying. You have to stand for the truth, obviously, but you have to say it in love, like you said, and you have to do it in a way where you care about the other person and you want them to benefit from the scientific truth that you've learned from. The thing I'll say with regard to that with me, I mean, I've had challenges in this sexuality area. I've had challenges with temptation and that type of thing. I think almost all males do, especially high testosterone males. And so where I found this secular scientific, natural science research helpful is that it helped me to understand myself better and understand why sometimes you have inclinations that you wish you didn't. And I guess self-management became easier for me. And that's my hope. That's been my hope with the college students I've worked with and whoever I've worked with is can kind of give them that same gift as far as, okay, here's what's going on. Here's what's going on in the male's head, female's head. Here's what men need to know about the women and vice versa, and what men need to know about themselves and vice versa. So when you get those insights, those scientific insights, then you can kind of get outside yourself and coach yourself, and again, be have a scientific knowledge of it, so you can kind of be dispassionate with yourself when you find yourself going down a pathway that kind of conscious wise is not a good pathway. Then you can also say, okay, yeah, I understand why I'm doing this. I'm not a horrible person for thinking this way, and the proper thing for me to do is take over from my limbic system, which is making me want to do this, and letting my cerebral cortex, do the work here, and walking away, going the other direction or whatever. So that's been really the passion of my heart. And I think my calling with this is to put these scientific tools and these understandings in particularly young people's minds, because I alluded to the testosterone trap / male danger zone. There's just so many ways, especially these days, with internet porn and everything you're an expert in, the emphasis on not getting married, younger, hooking up instead of having a relationship, all the different ways that young people are kind of pushed in a bad direction. It can be extremely helpful to them to know the science, what the science says, and be able to kind of cling onto that as opposed to the different things that they're being told. So
yeah, that's a great point. I think one of the things I've worked with human trafficking for years, and we've worked with people who worked in strip clubs and prostitution and all the things. And one of the pushbacks I've heard from people is, especially from like Sex Workers Guild or, National Sex Workers things is, these people want to be doing these things. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a great thing for them to be doing. If they want to sell their bodies or, strip in front of people, that's fine. And again, I'm not here to judge people on their worth and value, but when you look at the science, not even from a moral or, biblical perspective, when you look at the science, for a female to stand in a room full of men they don't know and take their clothes off is one of the most vulnerable things you could possibly do. And in any normal circumstance, based on science, you would go into fight, flight, or freeze and, attack, run away, cry, do something emotional just based on the science of that situation. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, what makes it possible that these people can do this, right? And it's like, well, we know in order for that to happen, there's disassociation, there's a history of trauma, there's all these things. And so our society, it feels like, doesn't even want to talk about the science of it, because they want to go, well, you're just a Christian, and so the reason you have a problem with it, it's like you're morally opposed. I don't even believe in that stuff, and you're being judgmental. And it's like, well, no, the science itself that you created as a secular environment says that these things are how these things happen. So what are we talking about, right? And I try to do that with the book really well, where I'm just talking about the importance of, the bridges or these conversations between you and your child. And the better bridges you build, the stronger they are, the heavier things they can hold, right? And so as you disciple and teach your child and they grow, you have more age appropriate conversations, but you've had so many and you've built the bridge so much that these difficult things are the bridge can hold it. And I think I try to do a good job of. I mean, I can't say, well, the Bible says so, right? I'm not going to come from a because it doesn't. It doesn't tell you what to do with your 3.5-year-old around, an erection. It doesn't tell you these. It doesn't guide you. The principles are there, but the overarching, like, what do you actually do in this moment when my 4-year-old's having a fit and I don't know what I should do? It's kind of it's blank on that in Matthew. And so, but we do have general revelation. We have the science that says, here's how a kid is created. Here's how they're wired. Here's the best knowledge that we have about their brains and their bodies and how these things will affect those things. So let's use that information. But I know some people are going to go, well, he's a Christian, so he's biased. And it's like, well, yes, I have a belief that direction, but the science itself is what is showing us what's best for these children overall. And for me, I get to, right? I'm a human. I have rights. If the science doesn't match my philosophical and moral beliefs, then I have to figure out why that is myself and wrestle with that. And so do we all. So anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's why when I went into the research for the book, I took the same approach you did, as far as like, I just want to see what the science says. And if it says that we're designed to be polyamorous, then I'm going to that's going to be what I'm going to be teaching. And, I mean, like some of the folks that have written some of these books where they claim that we're basically like chimpanzees, we're the same as chimpanzees, and that we were repressed because we're not polyamorous or polygamous, multi-polygamous as they are. But again, what I found fascinating scientifically was, and again, you probably know this, but maybe a lot of your listeners don't. You can look at a species and you can tell by their body structure what kind of a mating system they have or sexual nature that they have. For instance, the chimpanzees. Again, most Christians probably wouldn't go here, but I'll just give you an example for folks that might not be Christian listeners. If you're wondering whether we're monogamous, we have a monogamous history, which it isn't all monogamous. We've got a fair amount of polygynous history way back when, one male and several females. But especially for the last, if you want to speak scientifically, about the last 2 million years, there's been a situation where it's gone in the direction of monogamy, and you can tell that by looking at our bodies compared to chimpanzees. And again, we've got the four species in our genetic family, starting with the gorillas and then orangutans and then chimpanzees and then us. We have 99% of the DNA, the same DNA as chimpanzees, and it's almost 99. It's right at 98.99. So you'd think we're extremely similar, and that's the argument that these folks in the books that are saying that we're actually supposed to be polyamorous are making. But there are differences, and with a chimpanzee, for instance, their testicles are 3 times the size on average of a human male, even though we have bigger bodies on average than they do. And their females, the chimpanzee females, they're strongly estrus related. They're only interested in sex, and the males are only interested in sex with them when they are in heat or estrus. And their genitals swell. They swell hugely. They get red. They give off a really distinctive odor, and they end up mating. The females end up mating with most, or if not all, of the adult or even close to adult males in their pride, or what the proper term for the group is. And with humans, you don't see any of that. You see, again, the 1/3 the size of testicles. You see triple the size of the brain in the human of the chimpanzee. You see no or very little menstrual ovulatory cycle, estrus cycle. Estrus time, swelling, and any kind of no signs of ovulation, hidden ovulation in humans. And you see humans, females, if they're together long enough, and if they have a good relationship with each other, they start ovulating on the same cycle. And then the other I think the one that struck me the most was, and I'll get to the reasons why in a minute here, but you get the one that struck me the most was that chimpanzees are immune to gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, all the classic STDs, STIs that humans so readily get. We're so vulnerable to. And the reason is so for so many generations, they have been promiscuous in the way that I'm describing. And so they've weeded out, just like with alcohol with the Native Americans, and I guess tobacco came from the Native Americans to the Europeans, and different things that we haven't had in our developmental history really killed them off, and typhus and smallpox and all that with the Native Americans. We have not had for the last 2 million years much of a habit with most of our species of being anything but monogamous, and that's the reason. And again, it goes back to the brain size and how much effort and nutrition and everything when you're in a hunting and gathering environment to get the calories and the iron and omega-3 fatty acids that a woman needs to have in order to carry off a pregnancy. And then after 500 extra calories a day for that, and then 500 more when she's breastfeeding a day. So in order to have the brains we have, in order to have the human beings as they come out as a 21-year-old, we've had to have this monogamous situation. And we're very, like I said, very vulnerable to these STDs and such. And again, we don't display any of the other characteristics. We're closer to the gorillas. The gorillas are, silverback gorilla has 3 or 4 mates, and their testicles happen to be extremely small, proportionally to the chimpanzees especially, but us as well, because there's no question of who's dominant. They compete with their bodies against each other. The males do. Mm-hmm. And the chimpanzees, to get to the reason for the huge testicles, the chimpanzees, they compete inside the female. And so the sperm, the one that has the most numerous sperm over generation after generation after generation, is going to sire more of the offspring, and therefore you're going to get males that are born with larger and larger testicles when you have a promiscuous mating system. So it's things like that, and there's more that we could go into,
of
but
course.
I won't. Yeah,
I'm loving it. I just know we can talk about this for like 5 hours. It's great.
Right. So physically, there's physical ways that you can tell what a species, what their nature entails, and that's one of them. For us, and again, our brains are 3 times the size of. They've got. If you want to put it in the nomenclature, normal nomenclature, 3 times. The chimpanzees have 3 times bigger balls than we do, and we have 3 times bigger brains. And so, the outcome of that has been.
We don't always act like it.
Yeah, exactly. But the outcome from that has been what we've developed as humans, as far as everything we developed, the society and the civilization, I guess you'd say, compared to what chimpanzees have accomplished. And again, as a Christian, then coming back and looking at it after gathering all that scientific evidence, I think there's a special purpose, for humans. And then you read in the Bible of what God says as far as how man is made in his image, and there's a community right off the bat, as far as the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then the community that God recommends, I guess, or I guess commands, I guess, to Adam and Eve, for them to be for each other, and they complete each other, and then their children coming out of that.
Be fruitful and multiply, and be over the earth and subdue it, and take care of the animals and the plants, and yeah.
Right. So the way we are as a species, and comparing it to other species, again, you can scientifically look at the evidence and be pretty dispassionate about, are we meant to be polyandrous? Not polyandrous, but polyamorous. I don't think so. Not by looking at the physical evidence, and what, again, natural lifestyle matching. When you look at our ancestors, what's come down to us now, and then when you look at from the 1960s forward, with all the social changes that I mentioned earlier, and how families function, how people function in general now compared to how they did before that. Now, of course, you're going to have your things that
Outliers.
they did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have your things like racism, which when I was a little kid, that was real racism back then. And you're going to have your discrimination against sexual minorities and things that they could have definitely done better. But as far as family formation, marriage formation, family formation, I think it followed the natural pathway that whether you're looking at the Bible or any other religious text or not, humans are going to function generally better if they go down those pathways with the guardrails that we've been talking about than otherwise.
Yeah. That's good stuff, man. I love thinking about it. Again, like I said, we could talk about this for so many hours. I think what I want for people from this episode to really take into consideration is again, just pulling back and looking at the big picture and being able to look at historically how things have changed. And again, he referenced my book one more time. Like that's the hope of it, is that in parenting and in talking about sexual trauma, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the TED Talk, but
I did.
This understanding.
It was great.
Thanks, man. Just understanding that the neglect that's happened in an industrialized society, but forever, but especially in an industrialized society, of parents not teaching their children about consent, body safety, private parts, sexual development, and just the damage that that's doing from a developmental, psychosocial, physical perspective forever. But then enter the last 15 years and look at pornography and the cell phone and the internet and the exposure rate and all these things. It's no wonder we're where we're at.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, couldn't agree more. And it's just so many levels of super stimuli in these areas with everything you just named. I mean, previous to 15 years ago, I mean, it was like kind of the calm, good old days in the 90s up to about the mid 90s, as far as all the things you just named off. And it's just multiplied. It's exponentially multiplied. The harms that were there before, as you're saying, they were there, but they've been magnified out of all proportion now.
Yeah. And our parents, and I would say probably your generation's, margin for error was much larger, where ours is much smaller. And we have to be even more considerate and more on top of it and more, educated on what's attacking what's coming at our kids, and be able to, if we want the next generation to survive. And that's my biggest concern, is we look at historically, like what you just said and all that we talked about today, we look at the history of how moving away from the nuclear family and mom and dad and the connection and the safety and all those kind of things. And yes, of course, there were things that those generations of people were doing that were heinous, whether it was racism or sexism or abuse. That was all happening. And in some ways, that stuff has gotten progressively way better, obviously. And the society in some ways has gotten better as a whole in those areas. However, where we continue to lack in health is in the topics that we're talking about. Sexuality, relationships, those things seem to be going into the toilet statistically as a whole. There are populations of people who are doing it well, but as we think as a society, look at our technology and look at how smart we are and look at our medical system and look at how we spread the earth and do all these things, our relational life between husbands and wives, between parents, between kids and parents, to me, it feels like the statistics and the research is showing that it's in the toilet. And so my conversation is, how do we, as like I have a 5.5 and 8-year-old, so I'm biased, right? I'm like, I want to have this conversation with parents because your kids are my kids' peers or their authority in the next 10 to 15 years. And so we have a chance still to adjust the sails and turn the boat and do some different things, but we have got to do it very quickly. And so that's why I'm excited for, this conversation that me and you are having, for people to look at your books and your research and your stuff, just to gain more insight into what's actually been happening historically from a scientific perspective, because the average person is just so lost in where to go for good information. And again, my book, there's a couple of, I think organic thoughts and new thoughts in there. But what I'm really trying to do is take all the research from consent and body safety and sexuality and porn and bring it all together for a parent and go, hey, here's from 0 to 18, what's going on in our society, where we've come from. And then here's some tools and resources that you can prevent a lot of things from happening. Or if you've already missed it, you can help your kid recover from a lot of things that have already happened. Because very few parents have the time to listen to 12 podcasts and read 15 books and go out and find all the best information. And so I'm trying to synthesize it and then use my Christian and clinical lens to go, here's just what my one guy's opinion is. Take it for what what it's worth.
Well, it sounds to me like it's worth a lot.
I hope
because
so.
there's a lot of wisdom there, and just you having the insight that this is so needed by so many parents and people these days because of the information overload that we all have, the blizzard of information that's coming at all of us. A tool like that in such an important aspect of our lives is invaluable, I would say. So, you're a young father, and you've had this insight of what would probably help you, and you want to help other young parents. And I just think it's extremely wise. And in our conversation we've had today, I see a lot of wisdom in you beyond your years, and also just that curiosity that you have and the willingness to look at all sides and be fair about it, but then actually tell the truth, what you think the truth is about it, and not necessarily go along with the agenda, that people are wanting you to say. I think that's invaluable because we have too few truth tellers out there, that are, especially the ones that are caring as they do it, and showing Christian love and showing consideration, for the other people and wanting the best for them, wanting to help them rather than harm them with your argument. I agree. There's so many people out there these days that they want to just win the argument. They want to harm the other side, and they want there to be the other side. They want to it to be acrimonious, in society. So we have to get along with each other, and that goes for everybody. But that also goes with males and females, because we can't have a successful species if we don't have the kind of cooperation we've had between males and females of the past. And they had some really tough times physically and materially compared to what we have now. But you beautifully laid out the challenges we have, which is navigating through all this information, all this instant, communication, porn at a child's hand with an iPhone. The things that our ancestors, my parents, they probably couldn't have envisioned, the level of challenge on the level of the personal relationships and forming, couples and marriages and families. It's never been harder than it is now. So, folks like yourself are extremely important, and voices like yours are extremely important. And, both you and I think are just going to continue to lay out, from our life experience and also from the research we've done, what we see actually as the truth being. And because there really is only one truth. There's a truth of how human beings, their bodies operate generally. Again, we have those extremely small exceptions that we have to respect. But generally, you have, again, worldwide, you have humans functioning in the same way. And that really is, we talk about racism a little bit. That really is an argument against racism, when you realize that whatever part of the world you're standing in and standing on, you're a human just like the other human, whether you're in America or in Bangladesh or wherever. And so every human should be treated with dignity and with respect, and again, helped as much as they can with the advanced science that we've developed here in Europe and other places like that. Helped as much as they can to understand the human condition in the midst of this technological revolution we've had. And again, food science, because it's more of a scientific situation now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily cooking. It's trying to figure out what's the most addicting substance. And then same thing with porn, same thing with just screens in general. So you're a wise man, and I applaud you. So
Thanks,
I
man.
hope that, as we
Praise God.
said, yeah, well, yeah, exactly. We didn't get where we are, on our own. It's a very humbling situation, but I hope that we can stay in contact. And I know that I've learned a lot from you today, and I'm been inspired actually by you because you have the right attitude, I think, as far as whether it's a young parent or just a younger, so to speak, person. You got the right thought process, right attitude, because we all have to work through this together. The people that are older with the younger and the real young ones, and we have to work through this together and find the best pathway.
Yeah, brother. Well, I appreciate you so much, and thank you for coming on. You can check out his book at is it on Amazon, Dr. Malone?
It is, yeah. You can Amazon and most booksellers would have it, but particularly Amazon, you probably get your best
Okay.
price there.
And then you have a
So
website, right? drjoemalone.com.
.com.
They can get
Yep,
all
Dr.
the
Joe
other.
Malone. Yeah, and drjoemalone.com, and then that we have one sexiq.org that kind of tries to speak to the educating the young people to make sex and relationships more positive in their life. And
Yeah, I'd like to have you come back on and deep dive into that. So I'll get Sonny to reach out to you and try to reschedule. But for now, guys, thank y'all for listening. I really appreciate you coming on, man, and I hope everybody got a lot out of this. God bless.